100% good.
Oh, eat this. Already late.
Somebody will come. Anybody out there?
Do you have a phone?
No. Sorry. Somebody! Hello! There are 2 people stuck on an escalator and we need help. Now, would somebody please do something? I don't believe this. You gotta be kidding me.
I'm gonna cry.
Well, something else left to do. That's it.
Hello? Hey, don't worry about it. I'll fix it in a second.
He said he can fix it. All right. All right. That's more like it. He says he can fix it.
Walking down the sidewalk, kicking my feet as I move to the music. Step to the beat, I walk today. Dance with all my friends, and I step right aside. I throw my hands on the door,
So that's just to preface what I'm going to talk about. Again, we sometimes overthink brain injury when some of the strategies in accommodation are pretty simple and easy to implement. By show of hands, how many of you respond like a woman? You don't really have to. I would show my hand. That's probably how I'd probably be screaming or whatever. Anyway, okay. So what I want to spend the next few minutes on is talking about the domain areas that are sensitive to brain injury. Kind of what are those hallmarks of brain injury that we always talk about? And you'll see it's in a pyramid structure, and that's intentionally because it's based kind of how we learn and how we develop, right? So kind of that fundamental processes being at the bottom, we need those to build on to gain the other skills that we need. And so what happens in brain injury is, as people get injured at different ages, etc., part of their pyramid may become wobbly because maybe they aren't developing as usual, or they lose some skills within some of those different areas on the pyramid, and they start to become kind of unstable, or they have this kind of uneven profile in terms of skill sets, and that can be kind of perplexing to people. That it's like, well, how come you can do this but you can't do that? And some of that depends on maybe at the time of or how old they were when they acquired their brain injury. And it used to be that we thought young children recovered better from brain injury than people who are adults who acquire a brain injury. And research now shows that up to the age of about 15, that's kind of a sensitive age, and we're developing some of those higher order processes at that age. And so kids up until the age of 15, when they sustain a brain injury, their chances of recovering as well as adults is not as great. And part of that is they didn't have all the skills in the first place. And so if I sustain a brain injury at the age of 50, I have 50 years of learning, 50 years of experience, 50 years of whatever to fall back on. If I sustain an injury early on in life at the age of 3 or 4, I don't have those skills. I maybe never develop them fully because of the brain injury. So I just want to put that in context. How many of you work with kids? Anybody or have people work with kids? Okay. So just kind of be mindful of youth and brain injury could have a different outlook than adults. And not to say, if you have a severe brain injury as an adult, you have a lot of impairment likely that will occur. But that development is critical. So some of the areas that, and I'll kind of do it up the pyramid, so that fundamental processes, attention, processing speed, memory, sensory motor, and I'll go into a little bit more detail about what these things look like. As you move up the pyramid, now we're getting into kind of those new learning and language skills. So receptive, expressive, social pragmatics, visual spatial skills. And then moving further up into executive function, I'll just say, typically when people have difficulties related to brain functioning is impaired, right? And Liz had kind of shown you the anatomy of the brain. The frontal lobe is where your executive functions are housed, and almost always those are injured when you're in an accident or have a brain injury. And so there's almost always some executive dysfunction after brain injury. So as we kind of dig a little deeper and think about, okay, what does that mean? And we hear those terms all the time, but what does that really look like? And when you think about impaired attention, what you're seeing are people fidgeting or squirming in their seat, can't sit still. Maybe they interrupt the conversation consistently. They may talk excessively or be off topic a lot. That impulsivity, the last one's kind of critical. So some of the things that you want to think about, if you know someone has difficulties with attention or have impaired attention, maybe consider working on one task at a time until they master that task and can move on. Reducing distractions. And some things, I mean, sometimes you really have to look in the environment, think, what could be distracting here? So I worked a lot with kids in a school setting, and just pure placement in the classroom was critical. So if they were sitting next to a hallway where there was a door open, that could be super distracting for a kid with brain injury. So kind of thinking about visual, auditory distractions and making the environment as quiet as possible. Make sure you have their attention before you actually start to present instructions or ask them questions. Because if you don't have their attention, then you've lost them from the beginning. Again, you'll get this handout, so you'll get all of this. I'm just going to touch on some highlights here. So delayed speed of processing. Speed of processing is how quickly we process information and make sense of it, right? And so when someone has delayed speed of processing, they may be very slow to respond to questions that you're asking. They can look like they're not paying attention, so you can get confused with that. Maybe they don't follow instructions very well, which made me think, you're going to hear a little overlap in all of these because a lot of these look similar to each other. So just know that there's tremendous overlap. So with speed of processing, it's important to kind of just allow them time to take in the information you're giving them. And again, that if you kind of focus on one thing at a time versus a whole string of instructions, for example, that will help them because they need to be able to process what you're saying. If you give them 3 instructions at a time, they may hear the first one, they may hear the last one, likely not in the middle. Well, you know, whatever example you want to give there. Trying to not reduce your speed of speech so slow that you sound like the Charlie Brown teacher. But deliberately trying to slow down and being concrete in your, and not using excessive language to explain things. The offering assistance with completing forms, I do like to touch on this because a lot of times people with brain injuries get misidentified as having behavior problems. And part of that, they appear like they're not motivated, they may appear lazy, they don't follow through, so it feels like maybe they're not invested in whatever service or support you're providing, when really it might be that they just need more assistance. And sometimes we get into kind of this conflict in terms of being a provider. I used to work in employment before this job, and you want people to be independent, you want them to learn to do these things for themselves. But know with brain injury, at times we have to be their external cueing system, provide that extra support. So if you feel like we're holding their hand more than we need to or should, but you might not be. So help them complete forms. Like Liz was saying, application for services is a great example. If someone says they're interested in case management support, you say, okay, go online to this website, click here. The chances we're going to see that application are probably pretty slim. If you sit down with them, at least help them get started and help them complete that application, will be better. So I just caution you that you might have to do more hand holding than what would feel normal, depending on development. Okay. In terms of memory loss, a lot of times people with brain injury have short-term memory losses associated with their brain injury. Long-term memory tends to be intact. So that's part of the problem for a lot of folks in terms of adjustment and some of the depression and some of the different things they're feeling after brain injury. Because think of yourself and relatively functioning human being, professional, been doing this work for 27 years. If I had a brain injury tomorrow, and I knew exactly what level I was functioning at and was able to do, and now I can't do that, extremely challenging for folks with brain injury. And so as we think of mental health and brain injury, that kind of grieving that goes with brain injury is really critical. And it's not something that is linear. It's not like we move through the stages and then move out. It is really cyclical, and it depends on as they go through different transitions in their lives where maybe they sustained their injury in middle school and now they're graduating from high school, but maybe they had to take a year longer. So that brings up grieving. Maybe they're getting into a job and that's exciting, but it's not the job they had before. That can bring up some issues and concerns. Maybe their marriage is falling apart. So there's so many things that's so emotionally complicated with brain injury. That I wanted to touch on that while I was thinking about long-term memory. But in terms of short-term memory, oftentimes that's impaired. So a person may be able to describe what they do for work in detail, but not tell you what they had for breakfast that morning, because it hasn't made it into their long-term memory bank yet. So you can kind of see some of the things that that makes it look like. And again, we get into some of those behavioral concerns like attitude problems, fears, manipulative, etc. So for short-term memory loss, it's helpful if you can kind of repeat information as you're going through it and summarize that information. Either have them write it down if they can write it down, or you write it down for them and have them take it with them to refer to, so that when they walk away from your office, they have a reference for what it is that you were working on. Reminder systems. Now, that is, you have to know the person well enough to know what's going to work for them. And the biggest thing we hear is, I wrote it down, but then I lost my calendar. I wrote it down. People tend not to lose their phones as much as they do their calendars. So for those who like to work in an electronic environment, the phone is a really helpful tool now. There's so many technology devices we all use that are super helpful for people with brain injury as well.
And real quick, I just want to say there are some really great apps that have been developed for people with brain injury that achieve some of that assistive technology.
Exactly. So as you're thinking about kind of those assistive technology devices, it's not necessarily really complicated assistive technology. A lot of it's what we all access and can access through apps, etc. Routine is super important after brain injury, so as much as possible, providing them with routine so that they don't have to rely on their memory so much, but also because it helps to then institute that into their long-term memory. Okay, sensory motor. So that's really perceiving and responding to what's seen, heard, smelled, tasted, all the senses, right? And what you see with that is people can appear overwhelmed. They may melt down, they may shut down, they may withdraw, they may be irritable if they're overloaded. So, think about yourselves in an environment where you're like, oh my God, I'm so overloaded. Maybe you work a really long day and then you have all this stuff going on when you get home. It just kind of makes you tense and irritable maybe, or you shut down and retreat. So that's what happens with folks with brain injury, but it takes a lot less to get them to that point. So environment. Environment's super key for helping people with brain injury and trying to set that stage for success. So again, trying to keep that environment quiet, maybe keeping sessions to shorter sessions or to a minimum of time. Being very mindful of lights. There's an issue with fluorescent lights with people who have neurological disorders because of the flickering in the light. So that's a big issue, it can trigger seizures, etc. But they're also just kind of a lot to process, right? To take in fluorescent lights, so as much as possible, natural lighting, those kind of things. I want to touch on fatigue because fatigue is, to me, one of the biggest issues folks with brain injury deal with, lifelong after injury. Even if they've had more of a medically mild brain injury, there could be a lot of fatigue that that accompanies that brain injury. So checking in with people. Hey, did you sleep well last night? How you feeling? So you know they're starting fresh when you're meeting with them. If they're already fatigued and overloaded, chances of you having any success with them is going to be pretty minimal. And you don't necessarily want to keep pushing them because they'll just shut down, melt down, whatever it is. So So kind of be mindful of headaches and fatigue and some of those aspects. Naps aren't just for kids. Naps are an awesome thing, they're great for people with brain injuries, they're good for me. But rest periods as much as possible too, so just building in those rest periods. And it won't be that a person will say to you, oh, you know what, I'm kind of feeling overloaded, I think I need a 5-minute break, so I'm just gonna step back. No, they're gonna reach a point of explosion before they realize that. And so you probably have to help them recognize, looks like you're kind of getting a little agitated. You need a break? And help them clue into that, because they won't know that for themselves, at least at first. The more you work with them, the more they can understand and see that in themselves. Social pragmatics are kind of how we interrelate to each other, right? So it's body language, it's eye contact, it's all of those things that the unspoken speech and language we use with each other. So people with brain injury really struggle with that, and they don't interpret body language, eye contact. Sometimes they can be too much in your space, and you're like, whoa, bubble, 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 and they don't get that. They may say too much, or maybe they don't talk much at all. The key is a lot of folks with brain injury lack that awareness that that's what's happening, that they're in your space, that's how they're behaving. They can't see themselves as you're seeing them. So at times we have to really help them to see that and understand that. I worked with a guy who notoriously came up to my office 5 to 5 every Friday, and I'd be like, oh, you hear him coming? And I'd just like get that, oh, it's 5 to 5, I have to hurry up and get out of here. So I'd be packing up my stuff, and I'd be shutting down my computer, and I'd be putting away all my things. And most of you would come in my office and say, oh, looks like you're getting ready to leave. Hey, can I catch you next week? You know, about whatever. Not this guy. No, he blew right by all that. He's talking, and he could talk. And he walked me downstairs, talking, into my car, talking, and I'm like, window down. And then finally I said, you know, I gotta go. I gotta be somewhere in about 15 minutes. And, oh, of course, it's Friday. You want to have a life. I'll catch you next week. Hello. So that's my fault for not recognizing that earlier and being really direct with him. And some of the pieces here are just to be direct and be concrete with your expectations, right? So for me to be able to say to him, hey, you know what, it doesn't work for me if you come up 5 to 5 on a Friday. I don't have time to address your needs. So let's schedule a time. And so we scheduled a time every Thursday. He had 15 minutes. He got 3 items that we could talk about, because that's the other thing. He could come and he'd have a laundry list of things. I was like, okay, what's important in here? I'm trying to figure this out. So, and he had to send me his agenda in advance. So that's kind of how we worked through that, and he stopped coming up on Fridays. It was awesome. I got home, I got to have a weekend. Anyway, so you can see just some of the things that are helpful in terms of working with someone for social pragmatics. Just kind of remembering that they don't see themselves as you see them. That's why I put videotaping. We used to do that with folks to help them practice for job interviews, because they would get on an interview and just blow it, because they had no idea how inappropriate they were. And so once they saw themselves being inappropriate, it clicked. If I intellectually sit there and say, so here's what you were doing, they're like, no, I wasn't. I don't do that. Yeah, you do. So then we videotape and like, oh my God, I do that. That's so annoying. Anyway, but obviously you have to get their permission, but it can be super helpful. Okay, in terms of receptive language, that's being the ability to understand what's being said. And so you might hear people say, huh, or not really seeming like they're following what you're saying, struggle with abstract language or sarcasm, and some people just withdraw because it's just too much to try to figure all this out. And so again, some of these things that we tend to just be, how we communicate in our society, but being direct is really critical. Avoiding abstract humor. Humor tends to be a way we connect with people. For people with brain injuries, that humor may just go over their head because they won't get the abstract concept to the humor. Avoiding metaphors or things like that. The example I like to give is when you're in school, the teacher might say to you, this is going to be important, you might want to remember this. So most people will then say, oh, I better get out my pen or my laptop, and I'm going to type out whatever she or he's saying. This is going to be on a test, right? That's kind of what that helps you understand. A kid with a brain injury is like, what? And then is watching his peers and like, oh crap, they got their pencil and paper out, that means this is gonna be important, but now they're behind already. So really avoiding those kind of things, just be very direct and clear in your expectations. Expressive language is ability to be understood. So folks with brain injury often can be very tangential in a conversation, hard to follow, maybe, again, difficulties navigating the social rules, those kind of things. You will see it's very challenging sometimes to understand what is it they're trying to communicate with me. So again, that kind of being direct but redirecting. So a lot of times we feel uncomfortable interrupting someone and redirecting them if they're off topic. And especially in a group setting, I will say this is applicable. But if you're working with a client who's totally off topic, it's okay to say to them, that's really interesting what you're saying about your mother, and we'll come back to that. We'll come back to that another time. Right now we're focused on X. So let's get back to that conversation and bring them back. Otherwise, you're gonna lose them out there. Role playing is super helpful, and if you have that opportunity, that's great. And I think one thing I wanna just stress in terms of these strategies, it's not like you're gonna teach it once and then they got it. It's gonna mean repetition, reintroduction to the strategies, and that's the hard part, because we work in environments where we have, maybe we only see someone 2 or 3 times. So it's a challenge to figure out how do we implement these strategies, but know that it takes practice and repetition. Okay, so executive functions. Initiation is the ability to get started, and if you can't get started on a task, a lot of times you look like you're lazy or you're unmotivated, etc. And then you're challenged to do independent living skills. So in terms of initiating, I think the number one thing, I have a list of I don't know how many out there, is really helping them get started on a task as much as possible. Typically, if you can actually sit down with them and do the first piece of that with them, then they can get moving with it. The other piece is routines. Routines eliminate that need to have a new task you have to get started on or know how to get started with something. So just being cognizant of, this is a new task, should I help them get started with it? Mental flexibility is really challenging after brain injury, so that ability to kind of shift from one idea or train of thought to another idea or train of thought. And when someone can't do that, they look like they perseverate on things, they appear stubborn, etc. Very argumentative kind of feeling. So one thing that's really important is if you have a certain way you want someone to implement a task, teach them the right way the first time. If you don't teach them the right way the first time and then you go back and try to reteach them, it's going to be very challenging. Job coaching experience, again, one manager taught him how to bring carts in one way and another one said this way, that guy's wrong. Well, this guy actually was wrong, the first one, but there was no way we could unteach what he learned the first time. So it was second, and then he would argue with the right manager. I'm like, oh, we're learning with him, he's right. Anyway, so just kind of teaching the right thing the first time. The other piece is really preparing someone for transition. So if you're working with someone and you know that your time is this with them and then they're moving on to somebody else, make sure they know that from the get-go too and help remind them. Or we're working on this so you can get to this step. Help remind them of all those things. I'm moving through quickly because we will run out of time to do all these, but okay. In terms of reasoning, it's people look very concrete in their thinking. They can't think of alternative solutions, maybe difficulties answering open-ended questions. So one thing to be cautious of is typically we all learn from cause and effect, right? We know that if I do action A, it's going to lead to this consequence or this result. People with brain injury have a hard time understanding that. And so when you're working with folks and trying to come up with alternative plans around behavioral health, whatever it might be, you may have to help them lay that out because they won't be able to think of that on their own. You also will probably have to help show them, here's going to be the consequence of this action. If you choose to do this, this is what will result in that, and kind of play that out with them. Again, being really clear on expectations, et cetera, very important. In terms of emotional behavioral, a lot of times folks with brain injury have either kind of an overreacted affect or a low affect. So they may appear really flat, which can then look like depression or some other kind of mental illness. Or they, maybe have difficulties with anger management, meltdown, et cetera. And all of this really leads to kind of being an isolated person. So they have a hard time making friends, they have a hard time keeping friends, they have a hard time staying in relationship, whether it be a spouse relationship or some other partnership. That is probably, social isolation is one of the biggest barriers that we address with our clients who come into our program. So trying to help work through some of that by minimizing anxiety with reassurance. Help them understand what brain injury is and how it has impacted them, but don't just focus on deficits, right? I mean, that's what I just did for the last how many minutes. Don't do what I do.
Do what I say.
Don't do what I say. Focus on their strengths too. You have to know the deficits. I mean, that helps them understand why they struggle, but it's really equally important to understand what are their strengths, because that's what you're gonna tap into in terms of learning strategies, et cetera. Mindfulness exercises, things like that, to help them get in tune with what is the body response to some of those things we were talking about is super helpful as well. Role playing. Because I had whipped through that, and this was supposed to be just an appetizer, if you guys want a deeper conversation, we can have that. There are toolkits and other resources available to you if you are interested. So this actually is a toolkit that I contracted with the VA to develop. It's specific to military culture, but or folks who are in the military or veterans, but very applicable to the civilian population as well. So if you go into it, and the link is up there, but if you go into it, you'll see kind of Military Culture 101. It's a good overview of what you should know when working with someone who's been in the military, et cetera. But then dig a little deeper and you'll see strategies for assessing different things like memory, attention, initiation. How do you assess to see if someone has a deficit in those areas? And then another tab is about accommodations. And so it could be about how do you modify treatments such as cognitive behavioral therapy or some other treatments that are commonly used with folks with brain injury. What are some of the ways you would modify that to fit the needs of someone with a brain injury? And so play around in that toolkit. I will say that I'm working with them right now to modify the toolkit for our criminal justice population. And as we're doing that, I'm trying to make it a little less VA-ish because it's kind of dry, but there's great information in there. Just stick with it.
I'll put the link in the email.
Yeah, let's send the link. So what we're hoping to get it to look more like is this, and for those of you who said you work with kids, this is cokidswithbraininjury.com. There's a whole matrix in there kind of outlining a problem-solving strategy for you as a professional. All those things that I went through, like, looks like, they're squirmy in their seat, they're this, they're that, the other. Oh, that could be related to attention. For attention, here's how you assess for attention. Here are strategies. So it kind of just walks you through that problem solving in a little bit more easy to read way than maybe the other toolkit. And this is what the VA folks are going to start modeling after. But anyway, even if you're working with adults, I still think it's helpful to kind of get you thinking about some of those areas. And then the last one, if you guys are interested in this, I will try to figure out how to get you some of these booklets. But it's a really simple booklet that was developed out of Ohio State by Dr. John Corrigan. Kind of all those basic strategies I talked about. And some people like it in a paper copy. It might actually be really good for clients too, because it's colorful and it's got large print and it's not overwhelming to look at. But I'll get you a copy and you can let me know if you want more. Okay, we have about 5 minutes, so I'm gonna really breeze through this. Just let me preface this by saying, if you all want training or interested in working in understanding how to screen or identify brain injury, I'm happy to come back and chat with you in your individual environments, whatever you want. But I just wanna touch on why it's important. I mean, Liz talked about a lot of people have mild brain injuries, and a lot of people never seek medical attention. And so the folks that you're working with, who you're scratching your head about, they may not know they had a brain injury, you may not know they had a brain injury. And so that's why we really wanna work with settings on screening for lifetime history of injury, so that you can understand, is this part of what they're struggling with, right? And it helps with things like connecting the services, it helps with thinking about how would you adapt your treatment or your support for that person. I mean, the components are just you having an understanding of brain injury. I see brain injury everywhere. I don't recommend that, but you know, the more you know, the more you start to recognize those signs and symptoms in people. Medical documentation is awesome, most often not available, even if they sought medical care. How many of you have your medical records from when you were 10? I don't. So it's hard to get our hands on medical documentation. The other problem with medical documentation is that it only tells you about the incident. It doesn't tell you how they're functioning currently. So it's kind of like what we were talking about. You know they had an incident, but it doesn't tell you at all if they're struggling because of that. So then we have to look at establishing credible history and assessing impact, etc. So the gold standard is self-report, and that's challenging after brain injury because people with brain injury have short-term memory loss, maybe have post-traumatic amnesia, they can't remember the events. But it is the best we have. And so we ask questions in a variety of ways to try to get at what happened. We do a structured interview with folks, asking those questions: when, where, how, etc. And asking in a different way. A lot of places have a checkbox on their intake form. Did you have a traumatic brain injury? Yes, no. So how many of you have had a concussion? Would you check the box to traumatic brain injury? No, most likely. Some would.
Maybe after today.
But anyways, we have to ask questions in a different way. Did your bell rung? Were you knocked out? Did you see stars? Those kind of things. So again, this will be in your handout, but there are tools for that. And the first few, I did only put the free ones. I would say my favorite F word, my second favorite F word is free. So the brain check survey is free, online, good for kids, school-age kids. I don't know, OSU is the one we use most often. It's very brief. It goes to about the age 13 up. Very quick to administer, easy to use.
And I'll just say with that, I'll send you guys an actual copy of it, and then there's also a document that comes for clinicians, for people who want to use it, that explains it, which is great.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so we're gonna do the last round of questions and clickers. Get your clickers ready.
Never done.
Never done.
Hang on a sec.
Sorry, you guys, we're gonna run over just a couple minutes late.
I also just want to say thank you guys so much. We do a lot of trainings, and you guys are a pretty big audience, but a lot of times people are on their phones and stuff like that, and you guys have been really engaged, and I just really appreciate that. It's been refreshing. Thank you. Yeah, they'll have to do this question together. Sorry, who wasn't collecting your history?
See, campaign for Liz's new computer. Her boss's name is Gavin. Let's call him.
Start a GoFundMe page.
A GoFundMe. Yeah. Yeah. Gavin at BIA Colorado. Done. Okay.
Try again. Yep, yay.
That's okay.
Sorry, guys. Bear with me. Do you guys have any questions about what
Yeah.
Judy
Let's,
talked about?
yeah.
I thought, as you're presenting, and of course it adolescents. And so I was thinking about, how would you set expectations for improvement? Because you don't know where the brain injury starts and the adolescence begins.
That is a good question, and very typical, issue that parents deal with with adolescents. It's really trial and error, right? So let's try this and help them teach them a skill. They can get the skill and they can generalize the skill, and then they choose not to implement the skill. That's when we look at consequences, right? But you have to really give it a chance to see if they really understand the skill first. And I didn't do kind of the camp versus won't, but that's a big piece of it. Do they have the skill in the first place? If they don't, take the time to teach the skill, and you may have to repeat that a few times. See if they can generalize that skill. And then if they choose not to do it after that, that's when we still think consequence kids. Because they are still adolescents, right? And they're going to do things like that. Very good question. Other questions while you're going through this? And our contact information will be on the slides. You guys can definitely get a hold of us. Yay! Yay!
Yeah, and I'll send a very detailed email with the PowerPoint, with links, with how to refer, our contact information, and feel free to forward that to anybody.
Thanks.
So you know.
Yeah, people are leaving. So
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay. So you don't have to be a specialist to treat the mental health issue. You might want to be a specialist if you're treating brain injury, right? So remember I was saying that if you're treating depression or anxiety, just know they have a brain injury and how it might impact them. And keep that in mind as you're providing that treatment. So that's good. Yeah.
So does that get you?
Yeah. While you're doing this, I want to say that we are going to do a phase 2 of this training for clinicians. It'll be very much more clinically focused in terms of adapting treatment and therapies and et cetera. So,
And we will do that by webinar, so
Yeah.
if you're out of the area, you'll be able to see it.
Okay, so it's acquired brain injuries, that's that overarching term, under which these fall. Handouts up here about our case management program and PF in general. So if you guys are interested in any of that before you leave. Correct? Actually, I'm skipping this one. Sorry. Okay, that's it. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much, Liz and Judy. I was sorry that you have not signed in.
I have sign-in sheets here and the certificates of completion.